Here's the last thing I want to talk about. Let me show you some pictures of the full moon. Okay? So you guys have seen the full moon before. You told me that. Here's a little picture of the full moon right here. A lot of people say they see a man in the moon. Okay? Which is kind of like seeing stuff in clouds, right? It's kind of like seeing shapes in the clouds. Some people see this shape, these smudges on here, which are craters, right? And they say that this is shaped like a man's face. Honestly, yeah, I personally don't really see a man's face in this, but, you know, different people see different stuff. Somebody's pointing out that in Japan, people in Japan say they see a rabbit here. I can actually see the rabbit a little bit better. It's kind of sideways in this picture, but this is supposed to be the body of the rabbit, and this is the head of the rabbit, and you can kind of see two ears sticking out right here. It's still a little bit iffy, but here's the thing. People who say they see a man in the moon see the same man in the moon every single full moon. They see the same picture. And so what does that mean? It means they're seeing the same smudges every single full moon. And if we're seeing the same smudges every single full moon, what does that mean? What does that mean is happening? If we see the same smudges every single full moon, then that means we're always seeing the exact same side of the moon. We only see one side of the moon every full moon. Okay? And check this out. Look at the pattern of smudges right here. What do you notice about the pattern of smudges here and here? What do you notice about those smudges? And actually, while we're at it, right here. What do you notice about the pattern of smudges in all of these pictures? Even though it's partially shadowed here, that's the same pattern of smudges. Yeah, that's the same pattern of smudges. It's harder to tell in these pictures, but there you go. That right there, see that little piece? That's that. So that means that every single time we always see the exact same side of the moon. The same side of the moon has been facing the Earth for literally millions and millions of years. The other side of the moon is an introvert. Yeah, the other side of the moon is so shy, it never points towards the Earth. That means that human beings never saw the other side of the moon until recently. Until we started sending satellites and cameras out to the other side of the moon, we had never seen the other side of the moon. That means there are people alive today who were born before we ever saw the other side of the moon, which is crazy to me. And because of that, because we never saw the other side of the moon until recently, a lot of people like to claim that the other side of the moon was going to have aliens on it. Are there there were alien cities on the other side of the moon? Like the aliens just didn't want to see the Earth, so they set up cities on the other side of the moon. Are there alien cities on the other side of the moon? I'm not even going to wait for an answer on that. No, there's not. There's not. When we finally got to see the other side of the moon, it turns out the other side of the moon basically just looks like the side of the moon that's facing us. We've taken pictures of it. It's just a bunch more craters over there. Just a bunch more craters and, mountains and things. Just like our side. It's just the same. There are no aliens back there. Or I guess they hid and destroyed their cities before we could see them. I don't know. There's no aliens. I'm just kidding. There's no aliens back there. Now, does anybody know what we sometimes call the other side of the moon? Does anybody know what that? There's a name for it. What do we call the other side of the moon sometimes? Here's a hint. It's also a Pink Floyd album. Yeah, it's called the dark side of the moon. The other side of the moon, the part of the moon that faces away from us, is called the dark side of the moon, which is kind of a bad name. Is the dark side of the moon dark all the time? Because we can't see it, does that mean there's no light on it? No. That's kind of a bad name for that. In fact, the other side of the moon is dark only half the time. Because essentially, when our side of the moon is lit up, then the other side would be dark. So when we have a full moon, the dark side of the moon would be dark. But if we're having a new moon, our side of the moon is dark, and the dark side of the moon is actually facing the sun. So if the dark side of the moon is facing the sun, it's going to be lit up, okay? So why do we call it the dark side of the moon if it's not dark all the time? It's not because we thought it was dark all the time. It's because the word dark also means mysterious, okay? So the dark side of the moon, it's like in old maps when there was a forest that nobody had ever visited, like they'd never gone to the center of that forest, they'll sometimes say dark forest. They don't mean dark as in there's no sunlight in the middle of this forest. They mean dark as in the unknown part. So dark means unknown or mysterious also. Words have more than one meaning. Okay, now, but here's what I'm getting at here. Here's what I'm getting at. Because the moon always has one side facing us, that means it has a special type of orbit called, here we go, a synchronous orbit. I'll write that down because it's kind of hard to spell. So a synchronous orbit the moon has a synchronous orbit. It is synchronized, okay? But what do we mean when we say it's synchronized? So a lot of people think that the moon is not spinning. Because we always see one side, that means the moon is not spinning while it's orbiting us. That's not true, okay? That's not true. Check this out. The moon has to spin in order to keep one side facing us. There's a picture from your book. If this was the Earth and this woman was the moon, if she did not spin as she orbited around us, we would see all sides of her. We'd see the front of her, then we'd see the back of her, and we'd see her sides. In order for us to only see one side of her, she would have to spin to keep her front facing towards the Earth, okay? But this means you have to spin in the exact right speed to keep one side facing the Earth. And in fact, here you go, you would have to rotate exactly one time every time you orbit it, okay? Because notice she spins one time when she orbits. So when we say that an orbit is synchronous, we mean that the orbit of that object is synchronized to the rotation of that object. So in other words, the orbit of the moon takes 28 days, and the rotation of the moon is 28 days. So here's my final question of the day. Here's my final question of the day. Does the Earth have a synchronous rotation with the sun? Does the Earth have a synchronous rotation? Yes or no? Now here we go. When we're answering this, a synchronous rotation is one where your rotation takes the same amount of time as your orbit, okay? If you have a synchronous orbit, your rotation takes the same amount of time as your orbit. How long does our orbit take? A year, right? 365 days. How long does the Earth's rotation take? How long does the Earth's rotation take? Like one spin on its axis. 1 day. So our orbit takes 365 days, and our rotation takes 1 day. So the Earth actually does not have a synchronous rotation. And we can think about it in another way. The moon has a synchronous rotation, so it keeps one side facing the Earth all the time. Does the Earth always keep one side facing the sun, the same side facing the sun? No, right? So the Earth does not have a synchronous rotation. If we did, we wouldn't be able to live here. Because if one side faced the sun all the time, what would it be like? It would be super duper hot, right? It would be super duper hot. It would be so hot that that entire side of the planet, all the water would dry up and it would turn into the worst desert ever. So this, and it would actually, there would be no night and day over there. It would just be day all the time on half the planet. And then the other side of the planet would be night all the time. So everything would freeze over. So you die from freezing on one side of the planet and you die from burning up on the other. So it's really good that the Earth does not have a synchronous rotation.